I've tried to reverse engineer some of like my most successful projects and understand what are those three things that can create that connection between voice on different platforms, connection with the customers and how they talk. And for me, it's the intrinsic motivations and learning that from the horse's mouth. It's integrating your viewpoint in the world, and it's integrating the obstacles and hesitations that people experience. And if you combine those three, you can find that sweet spot of the message you need to communicate and the language you need to communicate it in, so that you're connecting with customers in the most effective and efficient way as you can.
You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and re-platform specialists James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy and leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by Shopify and another interesting topic. And today we are talking about how to create a coherent content strategy and how to execute it properly to drive results. And I love this topic because it applies to every single business. This is not technology specific or vertical specific. Everyone needs to understand what their messaging is, how they execute it, and how do they make it coherent across channels. Got a highly experienced guest today, Alice Brown, who is a messaging strategist and copywriter. Hey Alice, lovely to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, James. It's been a long time coming and I've been a fan for a while, so I'm stoked to finally be on.
Yeah, and for those of you who haven't come across Alice before, I highly recommend connecting with her and following her on LinkedIn. She posts a lot of really, really useful, interesting content, stuff that I've got loads of value out of, and I've obviously tried to use some of those principles that Alice talks about to improve my own website, which I often look at in shock horror for the quality of content that's on my own site. So I'm really looking forward to this because we're going to be taking a bit of a strategic lens, but then also talking about the execution piece because you do both, which is great. So before we start talking about messaging strategies and other stuff, do you want to give people a bit of an intro to yourself? Where you're from, what you do?
Yeah. So it all started for me working in a surf school, and I was working with customers every day, helping them get out of their comfort zone, helping them try and catch bigger waves or stand up for the very first time. And there was all of this fear and all of these obstacles that held people back from really stepping out of their comfort zone. And so my job was to help them overcome those problems and find solutions for them to make them feel at ease and feel confident, taking that next step up to the next level. And after a while, I realized that maybe this is something that we could talk about in our blogs or on social media. And it really resonated with people. There were people sitting at home who were experiencing the same obstacles and hesitations, whether it was, real life dangers of being in the sea or like emotional or irrational fears. And as I started to move into the world of marketing after 12 years of surf coaching, I realized this was a strategy that had legs, and it now sort of bleeds into everything that I do in helping people overcome obstacles and hesitations. So I am a messaging strategist and a copywriter, but it always comes down to connecting with humans, helping them see what they want to reach and that goal they want to get to, understanding those friction points and obstacles in the way, and helping people's customers, my clients' customers, get to that point and feel comfortable and confident, trusting this new brand or getting outside of their comfort zone.
I really like that. And we were talking about this before we did this recording about that copyright. When people hear the word copywriter, it doesn't convey that kind of strategic lens so much. And actually that copywriting undervalues like the skill set and the experience that a strategist like yourself brings in, because understanding the audience, getting the messaging proposition right first, then drives the execution. So I really like that, Ads. And you're right. I mean, it's applicable to any business because people often underestimate how important it is and how much effort is required to understand how people want to be talked to. And we all have our own preconceptions, don't we, of what we do, what language we should use, and whether it resonates or not is a different thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think this brings up the difference between a content writer and a traditional copywriter and a conversion copywriter, which is where I see myself, in that, it's all words, isn't it? But if we're thinking about copywriting in the space of we want someone to take an action, it's that really lovely collaboration of the head and the heart, the data-driven strategy, and the sort of emotional resonance that you use to execute on it. And that's where I like to see myself in, that we're not just sort of educating people, we're not just informing people, we are connecting with them on an emotional level, but we're driving them to take an action, which is why I love my job, because I get to measure the results of the more, what some people would call, creative side of it.
Yeah, indeed. And this links quite nicely into the next question, because some brands have a disconnect with how they talk to customers in terms of the language they're using, the language that will resonate with the customers. And they can also have disconnect across channels where they're talking different voices in different mediums. And I think what I find, and you talk a lot in your posts about the psychology, about understanding humans and what influences how we behave and how we respond. And I find that a lot of businesses don't understand that part. It's the psychology of the human behavior and what drives us to respond. Do you want to talk us through a bit of what do you see? Why do you think certain businesses or some businesses have disconnects in terms of how they talk and how people want to be talked to?
Mm-hmm. For me, every project starts with customer research, and not just at a distance sitting in a Facebook group and just copy and pasting people's comments about the obstacles that they experience. Yes, that can be really useful, but actually having a one-to-one conversation with a customer, someone who's been in that moment of highest tension quite recently, that emotions that they feel going through that decision-making process are very close to them, as in it happened quite recently, so that they can recall it in as much detail as possible. And I think the disconnect comes when maybe you've done, some sort of customer research, but it was a year ago, and since then other brands have come out in the same space as you, or you have created what you think your ideal customer is, and you have a PDF document with a little image from, a clip art image at the top of who you think your person is. And psychology of humans is so detailed and so nuanced that without actually having those conversations with customers, it's so hard to understand what is going to motivate them. And I think that's where the disconnect comes out, when you're unable to locate what intrinsically motivates someone to either use your product or do the activity that they're doing with your product, without understanding what that internal gut feeling is that makes them want to do that. The marketing that they put out can be quite surface level because it's what they think their customers want. And so then if you think about it in terms of language, yes, your brand is going to have a viewpoint on the world that's going to influence the way that you speak to people. But actually collecting that voice of customer data, aka the transcripts of the interviews you have with people, gives you an insight into how people describe their problems and they describe the motivations. And it's something that AI cannot replicate. The language that people use, the nuances of the emotions that they experience, and exactly the language that they use is so unique to an audience that can make a brand so unique. And I think it's about gathering those different pieces of information. So I've tried to reverse engineer some of my most successful projects and understand what are those three things that can create that connection between voice on different platforms, connection with the customers and how they talk. And for me, it's the intrinsic motivations and learning that from the horse's mouth. It's integrating your viewpoint in the world, and it's integrating the obstacles and hesitations that people experience. And if you combine those three, you can find that sweet spot of the message you need to communicate and the language you need to communicate it in, so that you're connecting with customers in the most effective and efficient way as you can.
What do Mattel, Victoria Beckham, Sennheiser, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet. It also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. Shopify, powering the future of enterprise commerce. Find out more at shopify.com/enterprise.
Yeah, I like the fact that you tease out the thing about the research you might have done a year ago, but things move on, the market changes. And I see this a lot as well of the people who might have had a snapshot in time about how they position themselves or how they describe their USPs. And those things become stale quite quickly. And even the language changes. The phrases that people use. I've been involved in customer groups, and I know this is that some businesses, they probably might not have the time, effort, or budgets to do proper, meaningful, large customer groups. But working with large business, when you get a group of customers in a room and you suddenly pull apart all of these assumptions that you have and realize that some of the things you held true really don't resonate, and other things that you thought were quite woolly really stick with the audience, and it helps you to refine it. So yeah, I think it's really good to point out that things change over time.
Yeah, and what I found in the past is that actually when you're speaking to someone one-to-one and that person believes that you are a part of the business. So if I go into a customer interview on Zoom and say, I'm not part of X brand, I'm a third party, please be as honest and frank and real as you can, it takes away that element of I'm trying to impress you and make something sound good, which I think can sometimes come across in, say, like focus groups. You're maybe influenced by what the person says next to you. You want to sound impressive, and that can take away from that rawness of the intrinsic motivators, the reality of those obstacles and hesitations. Even if they're like irrational and emotional and maybe a bit embarrassing, they're still insights into the customer experience that can paint, extra texture into the content that you're writing or the copy that you're writing. So for me, it's about, getting a conversation booked in with someone as close to that decision-making process as possible, and in a space where they're reassured that, yes, we might use some of their ideas, but it's never going to be attributed to them. It's anonymous as far as they're concerned. And making them feel comfortable to reveal those things. So personally, I would suggest doing, one-to-one interviews as opposed to a group, because you get so much deeper into and under the skin of the problems or the desires of the customers.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've got a question about how you marry the customer lens with the brands in, because some brands, and you find this in, I founded businesses often, where there is a real emotional buy-in to what that brand should be and the style and the tone, and there's quite prescriptive way of how we talk. And that might not always marry up 100% with the outputs from the customer insight. How do you approach this? Like, how do you guide people on marrying the two together so you reach a point where the brand is happy that it's not portraying what it wants to stand for, but actually it's talking in a way that will land properly with its audience?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, because when I ask for feedback from people, there are really only two questions that I ask, and I've had to bring boundaries to how people provide feedback to the things like, the strategies that create and the copy that I write. And those two questions are, is it going to resonate with your customer? Is it in line with your brand values? And sometimes a sentence or a phrase or a headline could feel disconnected from what else the brand is saying elsewhere, but it's come directly from customer data. So I try and encourage my clients to see that as almost a priority over, this doesn't feel right. If it's totally opposite to like what the brand values are, that's fair enough, and we'll find a middle ground. But I find myself having to educate a lot of people on what's more important? Does it resonate with your customer? And if not, why not? Usually the decisions that I make on what to write are based on conversations I have in interviews and survey results. So it is a middle ground that you have to balance. But I would say, if anyone listening to this is in the position where they're not sure how to find that balance, ask yourself those 2 questions before you say, okay, why else does this not fit? And I would prioritize those 2 things before you go and, change things just because it doesn't feel right, or it's slightly different from the last campaign that you put out. And that might give you some fuel to revisit your brand voice guidelines to say, yes, we were really strict about how we were speaking before, but can we speak in a different way that's actually going to match the worldview of our customers better? Therefore, do we need to change the cadence or the vocabulary that we use just so that's more aligned with the people we want to be connecting with?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you obviously put a lot of content on LinkedIn. I enjoy reading there. How do you apply this discipline to your own content? Because you post a lot, and you've got you obviously weave in your passion, love, and expertise in surfing and self-instruction into the distilling the expertise around the messaging strategy and the copywriting. How do you plan, focus, and narrow down what you're going to write about and use these principles?
It's a balance of reacting to news in the sport and outdoor and e-commerce world and how my worldview views that situation. But majority of the time, it's down to that sort of 3 ingredient formula that we spoke about before. What are the intrinsic motivations for my customers to work with me or hire someone like me? What is my worldview? And what are the obstacles that are standing in the way of them engaging with me? So for me, the intrinsic motivation for someone else to work with me is that they want to help their customers perform and they want to be seen as a teammate or a mentor to their customers. So, I might talk about, surf coaching and being a mentor and helping people, and that, feeling of reward when you achieve something. That's what they can be for their customers. The second thing, worldview. As I said, I come from sports coaching world. I worked in surf schools for 12 years and I did 4 years managing ski schools. So what have I learned from the world of the outdoors and taking people for their very first surf lesson where they're actually terrified of the sea? And what analogies can I draw between my process of coaching from my experience and make that as a parallel with the business world? And then obstacles and hesitations. Obstacles or alternative solutions to me. AI, obviously, it seems to be everywhere on LinkedIn at the moment, and it's a great solution for some people. But the other alternatives are getting an in-house generalist marketer to do the copywriting as opposed to a specialist. And can I draw out that moment of tension to expose it or address it? For example, can I talk about AI used in copywriting and how it is sort of an average sum of everything that exists on the internet, unless you have really good input and the most human input that you possibly can, so that your process on AI is a tool rather than a starting point and a strategy. So in this instance, I would be talking about customer interviews, getting voice of customer data, understanding their decision-making process, their emotions as the input to help AI structure it, but it's not something that can be replaced. So that's why you might want to hire me instead of getting a generalist or AI to write something. So yeah, it's either a combination of those 3 ingredients or just focusing on one of those is always what if I'm at a loss for what to write, is one of those 3 things.
And how do you use AI? Because I use AI. So I run the podcast with Paul. We create posts. I will sometimes use the AI generated notes to help me structure some of the landing page stuff. But I know some people who will just let AI write content and then they'll just post it. There's a real mix. So how does it add value to you? Where do you see it reinforcing what you do?
Well, first drafts are notoriously awful to write, whether you're a copywriter or not. And so once I've gathered all that information and I've seen trends and themes in what people have said, and I've got that actual human language and insight and psychology that is not replicable by a robot, even though they like to use logic to understand emotions, doesn't always work like that because emotions aren't necessarily logical. I use that data to, create first drafts a lot of the time. So if I have that human input, it helps the output stay human, but it can speed up the process of, writing a landing page or planning a landing page. If I say, here are 5 problems, here's the language that people use to describe that. Here's the product and the solution and how the founder sees that solution helping people, or this is the new value proposition we've come up with. Can you create a landing page that addresses that and shows the transformation? So using really, I guess old copywriting formulas, but they still work. Problem agitation solution, desire obstacle solution, ADA, just using that as a starting point just to get the first draft done. And then I can go in and think, okay, well, there's a really good analogy that someone used when they spoke about that problem. I will embed that in the start, but I at least know what the structure is. So first drafts, definitely really helpful. And also finding loopholes and biases. If you've written something and you don't have someone sitting next to you who's totally impartial to read through it, you can put it into, I use Claude most of the time, and say, where are the loopholes? Where might people feel hesitation around this or skepticism? And just highlight some of those moments where you just need to develop your argument a bit better, or add in another proof point, or make the problem or the solution feel more tangible and emotional, rather than it being surface level, and talk about the outcomes to a solution rather than just the benefits, which is sometimes a bit surface level. So I guess those 2 things are probably the things that took me the longest when I didn't have these tools at my disposal. So yeah, the first drafts and finding gaps and holes and moments of friction, skepticism that I can then go in and address.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it being used for that, about the loophole piece. I've not. That's given me another option for how I can use it for first drafting. 100%. I find that really useful. But then you need it's the discipline, isn't it? You have to have the discipline about the prompts that you're putting in and the tool you're using to know that what you get back is going to be relevant and add value to your process.
Yeah, for sure. It's trial and error. I've spent, if you add up all the hours I've been playing around with it, and I'm never going to be a prompt engineer expert, but I've understood what works and what doesn't. And even if it comes back with some crap, at least it gives me a starting point of, I do not want to write this. And then I have an alternative to address a problem, or to, refine a messaging strategy. It's a starting point. And the main thing for me is that blank page. And I think for everyone, whether you're a copywriter or not, the blank page is the worst moment. And at least if you can get something that ChatGPT or Claude or whatever has created for you, it's a starting point, and editing is so much easier. You can scrap whole paragraphs if you want to, if you just don't think it works or it's not going to resonate. But it gets over that hurdle of the blank page.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I think when you get big change in the industry, and I know, I mean, it is a massive buzz. Everyone's obsessed. It's almost like AI didn't exist before, and you've had AI copy generators for years. It's not a new thing. It's just the scale at which and the democratization of usage. But there will always be people who are naysayers who refuse to use it and say it's terrible. But actually, it's always an in between, isn't it? There are genuinely valid use cases where I think it helps experience, smart content strategists, copywriters like yourself, to hone their outputs. Whereas if you're not good at copywriting, you're not going to get a good output because you don't have the governance structure to go around it.
I think if you've got the right input and you can understand what you're trying to achieve in a piece of copy on a landing page or in an email sequence, I think that is probably the most time-consuming part, because, as we said, it's human conversations. You can't imagine them or assume them or predict them. Then it's just a few prompts that you put in, and what comes out is going to be better than you sitting down and writing from scratch. So the idea of being, a good copywriter, I think, is probably more mentally debilitating than it needs to be. Good copy is something that resonates with people. You don't need to write the cleverest, quippiest content and language and come up with all these puns and analogies to be a good copywriter. To be a good copywriter, I think you need to understand humans. You need to have a goal set for whatever you're writing. I want someone to believe, think, or do X by the end of it. And, piecing all the bits together, it helps slicken the process, and maybe we can be a bit more succinct than others. But I think you can do a good job if you have really good detailed customer data without needing to be a trained copywriter, which might be putting me out of a job. But
so yeah, I find that interesting. And this is why I love these podcasts, because getting different perspectives helps people make better decisions in the world. I've generally found, now I think inevitably there will be talented people who aren't trained copywriters who have the ability to write really good copy, but I find them few and far between. I see a lot of people who don't understand the rigor and discipline around writing content, who can create content, but it's not well structured. It's got inconsistencies. The tonality varies too much. So I personally, I've been a long proponent that get a specialist in for these things, because you get execution better. So I'm probably the other, even though I don't do provide these services. I'm probably the person who would be saying, no, you need somebody like Alice in, because of that understanding, that structure and rigor that you bring to it.
I think messaging and offers, without messaging and without a clear or desirable offer, copy is irrelevant. You could be the most fantastic copywriter, and if you don't have clear messaging that resonates, if you don't have an offer that is desirable, it doesn't matter what you write about it. But they precede, the fanciest, most quippiest person and writer. So I guess it comes back to that difference between a traditional copywriter and a conversion copywriter, in that we're trying to make someone take an action, and you could be a great copywriter, but if you don't have the messaging strategy, it's not going to impact a business. It's not going to make sales. It's not going to get people to subscribe to your email list. Copy helps, but without the messaging and without clear offer, it doesn't really matter that much. You've got to have those in place before you then form it with the frameworks that are usually used in copywriting and the voice.
Yeah, and this is why I said to you when we were talking about this, is I see you as a strategist as well as the copywriter, because the strategist has that wider perspective. It's that understanding that the psychology of human behavior is a fundamental driver to success in this. Therefore, you have to apply that into a specific audience, because audiences vary, and there is emotional stuff in here that drives and impacts how we react. And then there is the brand side, and being able to marry that together to create an output that is both aligned with the brand values and tonality and style, but nails that messaging and is concise and precise and drives action. That's not simple. That is where you get that multidisciplinary brain working.
Yeah. And I don't know what my response to that question is. Sorry.
I think I'm just saying that I'm praising you. That's what I'm doing. You're being humble, and I'm the one who's saying that actually you're probably undervaluing. That's why I always see when I say copyright. I guess I mean it in that more pejorative sense of that broader perspective. I got a related question actually, and I always love this one because you take landing pages for example. And I think if you've got like a mono product and you've got a big landing page, there is this eternal battle between short versus long copy. There are people who are ready to buy and you don't want to put them off by drowning them in info, but there are people who need that persuasion. And if you have like a considered purchase product, there's probably a lot of information and all those potential barriers to purchase and those potential barriers to action where you need to, you were saying about giving them like the evidence and the proof, etc. Where do you stand? Like, how do you decide what length, how much information is required, and when short is better than long?
Mm-hmm. I get asked this all the time. It's as long as it needs to be, which is not an answer for you. But if we go back to this idea of basing everything on human psychology, there are 4 types of decision maker. And the likelihood is you have all 4 of these people in your audience, whether you like it or not. There are a few exceptions, but there are methodical decision makers and humanistic decision makers. There are competitive and spontaneous decision makers. The competitive and spontaneous are the people that make decisions quickly. Competitive is, is a bit more internal drive to, wanting to do better than someone else or wanting that personal gain from it. The spontaneous decision makers are just like, we'll just go with this because they need a decision really quickly. There are the methodical decision makers. They do their background research. They look at your about page, they look at your Instagram. If they might do your Trustpilot audit of what people say about you. And then the humanistic decision makers connect with a brand for its personality or the founder through their personality, and they want to share those values. And methodical and humanistic decision makers need that extra persuasion. Whether you like it or not, the likelihood is you have those people in your audience. Even if you want more than anything for people to make a snap decision that you are the best option, not everyone is like that. And I think people who are for the argument of short copy are really only speaking to those quick decision makers. And what you need to try and do, for example, if it's a one product business, is speak to everyone and give those fast decision makers the opportunity to buy quickly, but then give the people who take longer that extra background detail information. When you're going through those interviews with people or the surveys, address those obstacles and hesitations that are stopping someone from saying yes to you, or consider yourself versus the alternatives. The alternative might be, for me, it's AI, it's an in-house generalist, content writer maybe, as opposed to a copywriter. Do I need a conversation about what the difference is to convince someone? It's about making sure that, you're speaking to both of those. So part of it comes into like the actual design and thinking how you're structuring your page so that a fast decision maker can, skim read. They're basically going to look at images, GIFs, diagrams, videos, headlines, and the methodical decision makers are the ones that are going to read everything underneath it. So you need to communicate why someone should trust you or buy your product in the headlines as much as you do in the body copy. So it's about speaking to both. I'm not, gunning for long copy all the time, because sometimes, you can communicate and get someone over that barrier in a very short space of time, but you don't know what the answer is until you speak to people and understand what that decision-making process is.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it's in line with what you're saying about applying customer mental models, which is the whole process of who's coming to the page, what are their needs, what are their likely questions they need answering, what objections do they have, and what are the reasons why they would exit. And then looking at how you structure and prioritize content, because you can quickly do, right, we really need some really nice bullet point USPs. We need a video, and it's really nice way of tackling that. And then you can quickly work out how complex that set of requirements is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big drive in e-commerce around personalization. And for a lot of sites, people talk about content personalization, but very few actually do it. I'm intrigued to know what you're seeing and what you think the role of personalized content can be on whether it's an e-commerce site, non-e-commerce site. And are you seeing anyone doing this well, where actually the copy and the content that's being shown to people is varied based on who the customer is or what customer segment they're from?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of that personalization, the way that I would usually approach it is when I'm reviewing customer interviews, transcripts, surveys, there's always going to be certain themes that we see in the responses, whether it's themes and obstacles, themes in motivations and drivers. And that's how I like to categorize those different sections. So you're almost creating like new ICPs. And so I think that really is one of the most effective ways of personalizing journeys for people in understanding the different decision-making processes that different people have, even if they're using the same product in the end. So in terms of brands that are doing this well, there's two that I'm on their email list. I sign up to a lot of email lists to try and unpick what people are doing and to see, what the content is coming towards me and is it actually going to resonate based on the actions that I've taken already. And there are two in particular that really resonated with me and I thought they did a really great job. And one of them is called 8 Hours. And they are a supplements company that help people improve their sleep. And it was really in tune with intrinsic motivations, and that at least the first few emails that I've got from them, I've probably been on their email list a couple of weeks. And they talk about what my intrinsic motivation to want good sleep, and it's around business and be able to perform and having the energy after work to go outside and go for a surf. The other is a brand called Freaks of Nature, and anyone who knows anything about surfing knows who Kelly Slater is. He's won the world title 11 times, and the tagline for his brand is "Fuck the gym, go outside," and that is like my life's mantra. But in various headlines that they've got in their emails, they are so great at aligning with their customers' desires beyond the. So it's a sun cream brand. Sorry, I didn't mention that. They're a sun cream brand, and so many sun cream brands talk about how it's not sticky and the SPF factor and where it's made and its natural minerals. Now, before Freaks of Nature talk about any of that, they talk about specifically not wanting to cut a run short for fear of burning, or the memory of an amazing surf, not wanting to be overridden by the discomfort of sunburn. And they are connecting to my intrinsic motivations so well. They really stood out to me. And they're worth going to have a look at because, yeah, some of their marketing is really fun.
Yes, yeah, I like that. Nice provocative strap line as well. That's what you need. It's people are going to remember it, right? That's the key thing. And there's the good copywriting in itself. Interesting. I've not heard of 8 hours before. There's somebody who regularly has moments where I don't get enough sleep. Now that you've made me find another site where I'm going to have to spend money on, so I hold you personally responsible for that. Guess what? A final question I've got for you is: how do you see content copy strategy evolving in 2025? Is it changing? Do people need to think about things fundamentally differently, or is it just about putting the basics in place and doing things properly?
It's a really good question. I think from our perspective, I think the thing we're going to see is a bigger chasm opening up between brands that are putting out really customer-centric, emotionally intelligent copy versus the surface level generic feature/benefit driven copy. I think because people are getting more confident using AI, that human side and that human input, I think, is going to get overlooked by people that feel like they need to output content very quickly. And so I think the main thing is that difference in that contrast is going to become more apparent between brands that are really focusing on intrinsic motivations of their customers versus those that have ideal client profiles that they built in a silo, not having spoken to anyone and assuming what they think people want, and using that as their input that is not going to align. We spoke at the start about connecting with customers across different platforms, and I think that's really going to be the main difference that we see in the content. And there's a psychological phenomena that I love and am currently obsessed with called construal level theory. And essentially what it is that if I can imagine something with detail, I can feel really close to it. So if we're thinking about the distance between you and a product, so for example, me and Freaks of Nature sunscreen, if they can create an image in my head of what it's like to use that product and how my emotions are involved in that experience, that psychological distance is shortened between me and using the product because I feel close to that experience. And this is where specificity is so important. Without that specificity, if I generalize about sunscreen that is not, sticky and it's a bit more of an abstract benefit and it's not really personalized to me, that psychological distance is increased. So the distance between me and using the sun cream is further away. I don't feel that urgency to get, move towards that. I'm not driven to take an action now. I might still love the brand, but I'm not driven to make a decision there and then or feel a bit more committed because I'm eager to have that experience. So if you are using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever LLM you're using, be really careful that you're not generalizing. Ask Claude or your LLM to be really specific and add specificity. Create that image in the head of your customer, what it feels like to use the product. Paint that picture of them in that experience. And I think this is something that brands are either going to do really well or not. And I'm seeing it more and more now. The more emails lists that I sign up for, that's a real stark contrast in, how they are integrating that human psychology and our innate desire to be part of an experience and to feel something. I think that's probably going to be the biggest difference that we see in the next 12 months.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because there's a couple of brands over the years I've used examples that are probably quite early on to stuff like this. So there's Palace Skateboards, I think, really good in their copy and their product pages of of building an emotional resonance with the audience, because they don't talk about the product. It's like basically a load of stoners at home just having a lot of fun with each other, which is perfect for the audience, not me to stereotype skaters at all, having been one myself. But there are different executions, and I think that psychological principle is lovely, actually, because for me it's similar to how retail spaces have done it. So there was a brilliant study a while back about supermarkets and the music they played in the wine section, and how that created an emotional connection with a particular type of wine and a particular type of scenario, like, particular music that would then make people think of Spanish wines, and that influence in people's purchases, because then they were like, oh, actually, I feel like I should be out on the veranda somewhere in southern Spain having a nice rioja for the evening. And it's amazing, isn't it, how you can reframe perceptions.
Yeah, I love that. Next time I go to the wine section, I'm going to keep my ears open, see what they're playing at me.
Just go in and with your like AirPods in with a specific type of music, and then you see what wine you come out with.
Some little at-home experiments I'm going to be doing over the next week.
Excellent. Look, I've really enjoyed this, and if anybody listening wants to probe further on how you could help them, or even looking for some pointers on where they might be going wrong, how do they reach out?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place, really. That's where I put out the most content, and I spend probably more time than I should there. But that's probably the best place if you're looking for someone to help you find your big ideas, to unpick what those intrinsic motivations of your customers are, and find that perfect blend with your brand's worldview to create that message that's gonna resonate and drive people to take action.
Yeah. Wonderful. Look, thanks for joining us. And for all of you listening, I hope you found it as interesting as I have. And Alice's contact details are on the landing page. Do reach out if you've got a project or know somebody who would benefit from an experienced hand.
Cheers, James.
You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast, hosted by experienced consultants James Gurd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-com strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.